Salam, Sahar.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Salim. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. It's a real pleasure to have you on. I think our paths have crossed a few times in the past.
Yeah, definitely.
But I know I've definitely seen a lot of your tweets. Well, on Twitter, you're quite active, and generally, I guess, in kind of Muslim circles and conversations, whenever there's something that reaches a national kind of scale, you're usually involved in the conversation in some way, shape, or form. And obviously, we'll get into that and all the work that you're doing, incredible work that you're doing. But I wanted to start, I guess, quickly by reading out your biography from your website, if that's all right. And then I have a very pressing question based on that. So the biography reads, Sahar Al-Faifi is a molecular geneticist by training and community activist by passion. Sahar's activism focuses on seeking to unlock the power of civil society, widen the Muslim participation and engagement, and build a broad-based alliance for different campaigns that include welcoming refugees, living wage, anti-racism, women's empowerment, and anti-Islamophobia. She is a blogger at Huffington Post, writes for The Independent, and has participated and has participated in many TV shows and debates against UKIP. She's also a skydiver. To be honest, my question was about the skydiving, because I just thought that was so out of place and random and quite cool. So I think to start off with, tell me more about that. Is that like a one-off thing that you've done, or have you been multiple times regularly?
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much. I'm really, truly honored to be finally in the Muslim Vibe. And thank you for your time. Yes, our paths crossed multiple times in many events and conferences. And it's a great pleasure to be with you. In terms of skydiving, yes, it seems maybe a little bit out of place. But I think it's a good time to talk about it, because the woman who inspired me to be a professional skydiver actually passed away only yesterday or the day before.
Really?
On Friday. Yes. So she was the oldest woman skydiver in the world. Her name, Dilys Price, 86 years old, from my city, Cardiff. And she passed away on Friday. So the story was, I did skydiving before, but it's tandem skydiving, which means you're attached to somebody and you just do nothing, and he jumps and you jump with them, and that's it. But I've never had the courage to actually skydive in my own and do the training and get the license for skydiving until I met Dilys Price. And she was the main motivation for me to become a skydiver. So no, I don't do it occasionally, though. I stopped for a while because of COVID. I've done the theory school.
You're qualified in terms of being able to go out on your own?
Not qualified yet. No, not qualified. But I can jump on my own. But there are different levels basically, and I'm still working towards my license.
Wow.
But yeah, I can jump on my own. Yeah.
That's very brave. I mean, I know obviously it's one of those things that people do kind of one-off for charity every now, like, you know, I've bungee jumped, I think, years ago, and it takes incredible courage, I think, at least, just to jump. It's very counterintuitive, right? Jumping off like some huge height.
Yeah.
I haven't actually skydived before, but as I said, like, everything that you do is, I would say, in some ways in line with a lot of the guests that we have on the podcast, and, you know, we talk about all of these issues. But I saw skydiving and I just thought that's really intriguing. I'd jump in and ask a quick question about that. So
you should do it, you know, Salim.
I should. I should. I think one day. I'm going to blame COVID for now. So I think that buys me about a year before I can before I have to come up with a better excuse. So I guess the framing of this conversation that we're having today is very much around your potential career in politics, and I think also the activism work that you've done up until now. But we want to kind of look forward at the very real potential that you could be getting involved in Welsh politics. So I think, out of pure ignorance, I'm going to allow you to kind of introduce and explain a little bit more about what position you're running for I think it's the Welsh Assembly, if I remember correctly, and kind of how the system in Wales is different from that over here. because I think, you know, most people are pretty much aware of the Westminster Parliament system and MPs and local councils and everything else. But I know the Welsh have a different setup. And it's very much, to be honest, as a sort of Londoner, I think I told you this when we spoke last time, that my geography as it is bad enough because I live in London. That means I don't know anything north of Watford is the north, and anything.
All Londoners like this.
We're very simple people, unfortunately. But so yeah, go on. Tell me more about the Welsh Assembly and what you're hoping to do.
Yeah, thank you for your question. The Welsh Assembly is the Welsh Parliament, and it has a Welsh name, which is the Senedd. So whenever I say the Senedd, it means the Welsh Parliament. And I don't blame you, Salim. Like, a lot of people don't understand the different political systems, and you know, not many people have the sufficient political literacy to understand it. And also, it's a little bit complicated and different from one region to another. So what you have Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and then you've got Westminster in England. Scotland has its own parliament, Northern Ireland has its own parliament, and Wales has its own parliament. But the way it works, that the Welsh Parliament has decision-making powers in few fields, not in everything. So some fields we have to rely on Westminster, like the foreign policy, for example. Some fields, no, we own our decision-making powers, for example, culture, education, agriculture, health, and so on. And what that means that we in Wales, we can elect our own representative in our own Senedd, the Welsh Parliament. And you know, Westminster has 650 seats. The Welsh Parliament has 60 seats in total, and each seat represents a constituency. So it's very similar to England in a way. The difference is, Salim, that in Wales we use a different electoral system than England to enable better representation. And this system is called the regional list system. So what you have, you've got 40 out of the 60 get elected in the similar way MPs get elected in Westminster, which is through first past the post. If you heard about this term, first past the post, that ensures power between the two main major parties, and people tend to vote for the parties instead of individuals. This is first past the post. Now in Wales we have this, okay, for 40 seats, but then 20 seats represent regions instead of constituency. And this electoral system used is called single transferable vote. So people then vote based on preference, and they can vote for two people at the same time if they want, to ensure a better representation and democracy. So what I'm running for, to explain it easier, I'm running for one of the regions, not one of the constituency. And that means not anyone can vote for me or elect me, but first of all, the party members need to select me first to represent that region. And if I'm selected, then in the Welsh Parliament elections that is happening in May 2021, I will get elected. So this is how it works. But why is it different and why is it better than Westminster? Because of the system, in Welsh Parliament, we have 50-50, almost 50-50 women to men representation. We've got 48% women, and we've got 52 men. In Westminster, the case is different. You've got 30% women and the rest are men. So this system actually ensures better representation. So I really hope that I explained it in a little bit simplified form.
I think so. I think anyone that follows British politics generally will know that you know, democracy on paper is very straightforward, but when it comes to kind of the practical realities of how the system is shaped, firstly, I guess it does stray a little bit away from what a true democracy is and should be, because of, you know, some parties, for example, or some parties receiving like 10% of the vote, for example, but receiving no or one seat in the UK. I think this happens to UKIP
Yeah.
in a previous election.
Right.
But yeah, so it is confusing, but I think you've painted somewhat of a picture of what's happening in Wales. And the party that you're running for is called Plaid Cymru. Is that right?
Correct. I'm really impressed you pronounced it
I
right.
was about to ask, was that pronunciation? This is literally from that one, the election night in like when you're watching the news till like 3 a.m. I
Yeah.
hear Plaid Cymru all the time. I have no clue what it is or what it means or
Yeah.
what they represent. So I guess the question was going to be, tell me a little bit more about the party as well.
Yeah, definitely. So Plaid Cymru means Party for Wales. Cymru is the Welsh word for Wales. So Party for Wales. In a simple term, it is actually the Welsh version of SNP, the Scottish National Party in Scotland.
Okay.
So it is a left-wing party, the third strongest in Wales, and is expected actually to gain more seats in the coming elections for many reasons, but one of which is Brexit. So Plaid Cymru is anti-Brexit, pro-independence. So this is one of their biggest vision, is to work through independent Wales with full devolved powers in all issues. So we don't have to rely on Westminster. And the story is that I've never been interested in party politics, Salim, at all. Like being a student activist and then becoming a community activist, party politics was not on the radar at all. But the call and the urge or the need for independence, especially after Brexit, is what made me join the party. And now I'm running to be actually the first Muslim and the first BME woman ever elected into the Welsh Parliament, which is quite historical. And the Welsh Parliament is 20 years old, but sadly never elected a BME woman or a woman of colour at all.
Wow. And I was going to ask actually, in terms of the I guess the breadth of work that you've done up until now, community activism is something that I think a lot of people engage with, and as you said, student activism as well. But there almost seems like there's that, and then when you get into politics in the very real sense, it's quite I want to say almost far removed, because on the one side, I think with the community stuff, you're kind of lobbying and putting pressure and being vocal and really trying to do whatever you can from the outside to change the system from within, or sorry, to change the system, or to complain about the system. But then when you get into the space of actually trying to get into power, and being in a position where you can call the shots ultimately, what kind of triggered that thought in your head that actually now I want to start working from, or trying to work from within the system and making change in that way?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about change, Salim, you've got two different approaches. You've got bottom to top approach, from community activism or lobbying, influencing people in power, or from top to bottom approach, that you're on the top and then you influence the community or the constituency or the region that you're representing. And I've been always, person of bottom to top approach. I've been always, into lobbying and community activism, and I truly believe in it. So I was never a career politician. This is why I want to say never a career politician. But I think what I am slightly fed up of is that the need to always asking people who might not share my background or or represent my class to represent me. Like always asking them to represent our needs, always asking them to introduce new legislation that could, benefit the communities that we are representing. I'm not talking about only the Muslim community, but the BME community, the working class, the deprived, and so on. And, it was also difficult because I have been constantly targeted. Not only, I'm not talking about the verbal physical abuse in the street. That's normal. That's part of my life. It's I'm used to it. I'm talking about the institutional racism, discrimination, the witch hunt, the smearing campaign, it was absolutely relentless, you know, especially when I announced my candidacy. I mean, since I was student activist, you've got far-right think tank like the Henry Jackson Society, which is a neocon, pro-war, far-right think tank that really targets any Muslim who happen to be active in public life. And the way they target is accusing them of extremism. And when you ask them, okay, define extremism to me, they fail to define it accurately. And what happens that any voice that challenges the establishment or the status quo get labeled as an extremist. It was funny at times, painful at times, but for me now I've got definitely, you know, a very thick skin. But since I announced the candidacy, it has become much worse because obviously I'm now too close to a position of power, something that they don't want, you know. And this is why institutional Islamophobia is excluding Muslims from public life.
So I wanted to ask, I mean, based on what you've just said, and I think, you know, we've seen that time and time again with Muslims in particular, and especially I think, you know, when it comes to issues around the Middle East, people love picking on statements that have been made or whatever else. But it sounds a bit brutal, but do you think it's worth it? I mean, the fact that as a Muslim and as a woman and as a niqabi, you have to work very hard, and we'll talk about, I guess, the niqab and representation, everything else in a bit. But there's like the odds are stacked against us instantly. I mean, the previous podcast guest that we had on, Dr. Soraya B, she was talking about her experience and the fact that her sixth form advisor told her not to bother applying for university because she wouldn't get in. She then got into Oxford and went on to do a PhD at Yale and whatever else. But I just feel like, especially when it comes to something like politics, but as you said, there is no representation. The journey to get there is so difficult. And ultimately, I feel like the head of state in the UK, Boris Johnson, we know what he said on record about niqabis being like letterboxes and bank robbers. And again, like, I think a specific response to that we can discuss in a bit. But the question I'm asking is that with the field so stacked against us and against you as an individual as well, with your kind of various layers of identity, what's the point?
Yeah, it's tough. Is tough, and I have asked myself many times, is it worth it? You know, is it really worth it? But the thing is, it is definitely, politics today is very toxic, is very divisive. People of color, immigrants are the main scapegoat, and this is what made Brexit campaign win. Is scapegoating minorities and the weakest of communities, and it could be something can put off anyone really, but for me is at time like this hope is born. At time like this people get angry and people get agitated. Like, there's no way I would accept this toxic thing. Okay, what am I going to do about it? It's time. We've been now agitated, agitated to make the change. And I feel that it's because it's toxic, I want to run and change that. It is because it's divisive, I want to run and change that. I have always said in many speeches that what's the point? The point for me is to exchange the politics of fear with the politics of hope. And some people might claim, well, you wear the niqab, you are the epitome of division, right? I've been told that many times, but it's not about that. Political arena has been dominated by white middle class men, and it's about time to change. And we've seen that in the American elections 4 years ago. It's when Trump won, the result was the Congress is the most diverse ever in America. The first Somali women refugee being elected, a Hispanic waitress, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, was elected. It's during a time of despair, hope is born, and this is what I hope to achieve. You know, this is the point. And to be honest, Salim, like, even before I started to politically campaign, you know, one of the things that motivates me is, number one is pleasing God, Allah. You know, that is my aim. You know, I don't want to please anyone. I want to use the politics as a vehicle to make a positive change. But secondly is when I see women who thought that they cannot do certain things because of who they are, either because of their skin color or what they wear, whether it's hijab or niqab or none. And that because the obstacles are massive, you know, the challenges are major. And it only takes one person to cause this breakthrough. You know, it is tough because I'm possibly the first female woman running now in the Welsh Parliament, but I just hope that God Allah enables me to pave the way in order to make it easier for people after me, because ultimately proportional representation, it's key in any democracy.
It's interesting. I'm just thinking, and I'm probably thinking a bit aloud here, in terms of, I've always seen it that the system, if we can just term it as the system, is like a huge ocean that's like gushing in one direction. And the attempt, I guess, sometimes, and this is why, you know, when you talked earlier about top down versus bottom up, you know, even with what we're trying to do with the Muslim Vibe, it's that bottom up approach where, you know, this is our platform, we own the narrative, we can control this, and we grow our audience and we take everyone on a journey together. But it's like very much grassroots and, you know, trying to impact on that level. I feel like when we don't own or we don't control the infrastructure intrinsically in itself, then we can never succeed. I'm not trying to obviously dampen your attempts in terms of politics, but I just want to have this kind of conversation with you about how, when even with the media space generally, like at like a mainstream organization, mainstream media company, you can make it as far as you can, and you can have some influence and some say, but ultimately the overriding control is not ours. So the underlying narrative, the underlying agenda is always going to be controlled by somebody else. And personally, I feel the same in politics as well, that there's you can have like, and that's the other thing as well, like, you know, when it comes to things of power, I always feel like people will give a little bit. So you'll have, you'll be able to impact how frequently they collect bins in a region, for example. But when it comes to actually social mobility, you know, larger, bigger issues, how we get to that point of critical mass and being able to tip the scales in such a way that we were able to change. I don't know how and when that happens. And I appreciate the fact that you've identified that, you know, the system, even though there is some progress being made, there is still a huge way that we need to go. And you see yourself as an individual that could make the difference in empowering somebody, or even future generations can look at you as an example and say, you know, this is somebody who, despite the various obstacles, has managed to kind of find herself in this kind of position. Do you understand what I'm getting at here? I know it's a bit vague.
I understand. Yeah, you know, it is definitely, the system is controlled by the few, and these few are really powerful, you know, financially, political, and so on. But at the same time, you know, how can you change the system if you don't take part of the system? And it doesn't mean that my way is the right way. I feel that there's different way of doing it right. So what the Muslim Vibe does at a grassroots level and bottom to top approach, it's the correct method for the Muslim Vibe. And I've been always taking this approach, but now it's about meeting in the middle. What you need is like people working from bottom to top, and people from top to bottom, and then meeting in the middle to change the status quo, you know, to change the system for the benefits of the whole rather than the benefits of the few. And it's a journey, you know. A lot of people don't understand that, you know, it really does take time. It might takes years, but you know, when it comes to Muslim representation or BME representation, we're really good at complaining. Like, you know, these we never hear politicians talking about our problems, from, let's say, stop and search to prevent, to poverty, to, you know, the over representation of Muslims in prison, for example, and things like that, because we don't have enough of us in the system to change it from within. And I feel this is what I'm trying to embark through this political journey, is to be part of the system, to change it, to benefit all. You know, it's not about Muslims taking over. You know, I really hope when this reaches the Daily Mail, they don't take it out of context. They love doing that, you know, they absolutely love it. You know, I'm not here to take over the world, and definitely not over Wales, but it's all about proportional representation and giving, not giving, but empowering the voiceless to have their own voice.
And in terms of your own personal journey, I think, you know, you mentioned, and it was, the way you said it was so blasé, but I think, I feel like, and I've heard this from other sisters, and especially Niqabi sisters as well, like the verbal and physical abuse that you've received, that's just like a part of everyday life. But as I said, like, and it's probably, you know, because that's been your lived reality for the majority of your life, you don't know any other kind of way, almost, right? But and I was telling you as well earlier that I think you're probably the second or maybe third Niqabi sister we've had on the podcast in over 100 episodes, and that's not by design or by choice, but it just hasn't kind of happened for whatever reason, you know, because often people will contact us, or somebody will mention what somebody's doing, and then I'll reach out to them or whatever, but it's just kind of never come together. And I feel like there is this, like I mentioned, it's, you know, Niqabi sisters are a minority within the Muslim space, and even amongst hijabi sisters who are also minority and everything else. But what has that experience been like for you personally, before we talk about getting into politics and activism and everything else? But personally, what's the lived experience of you as a Niqabi, in terms of what you've seen and been through just living your life?
Yeah, I mean, I've answered this question many times, and, you know, even answering this question has become also part of my life. But
I apologize for adding to that.
It's okay, Salim. I think it's important for people to know the level of it and how it affects. You know, when someone calls you a terrorist and a bomber and go back to your country, is not only just a trivial verbal abuse on the side. It actually could affect your psyche in one way or another. And I can, you know, share an example. Is when I used to work in the hospital, and my house wasn't far from the hospital, so I had to walk. I cannot walk from the same route every day. I really have to change it, you know, because I'm just worried that someone is following me and knowing where I work and could abuse me. You know, it does really affect your psyche. When you go to the train station, you know, you look right and left and back, and you're always like trying to be alert and aware just to defend yourself, you know, especially if I got to the train station, you know, 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night. But what was really different this time, in the last year and a half or 2 years, let's say, is that it's no longer the average white man who abuse you. It can be now actually men in suit who abuse you. And I remember vividly, straight after Boris Johnson comments describing veiled Muslim women as letterboxes and bank robbers, a white man in suit in Birmingham New Street train station called me a letterbox. You know, it trickles down. What people don't understand, that this toxic language actually trickles down, and it really affects the psyche of the most vulnerable of our society, and in my case, a Muslim woman. And it's really sad to see, because people even think, oh, because it's COVID and not many of us are out in the street, is actually less. But when you look in the social media, it's unbelievable. Like the abuse in the social media, the Islamophobic abuse, xenophobic abuse is rocket high, and because we don't have effective legislation in the UK for social media users, and it is growing, sadly. It's not like reducing at all, not even with COVID.
I apologize in advance. I'm going to ask another cliche question with your permission.
Yeah, cool. Like your
I feel
questions.
I feel bad now. But no, I was going to ask, because again, you mentioned in one of the articles you'd written on the Huffington Post around World Hijab Day, that it's a kind of, the niqab is a multi-dimensional item or object or whatever for you. So again, if you can kind of, I'll just ask it as a very cliche question. What does the niqab mean to you?
Okay, Salim, you said it. I forgive you. Is definitely is an act of worship. It's a mean for me to seek the pleasure of God, or of Allah. That is the first and foremost reason. But also, it's a symbol of empowerment, liberation, and resistance. And it might sound odd to some people, especially some of the, extreme white feminists, who trying to impose their views that, like, you Niqabi women, you're actually oppressed and all of that. And in fact, is so liberating, and also it's a symbol of resistance, because, people like me are painted in a different way. We're painted as a threat, as danger to society, as someone to be excluded. So me, by being me, I'm actually resisting all the stereotypes, not only resisting them, but also trying to break them down, and just widen the horizon of people understanding that not everything you hear is true, and not everything you told about is true. And this is what happens. Like, the general public are socially conditioned by the print media specifically to see minorities in a different light. And what happens with the Muslim community, we are always a security threat, and we have to watch them. And especially the niqabi ones, they're too dangerous, kind of thing. So it is an act of worship. It's a symbol of resistance and liberation.
Do you feel a burden of responsibility to positively represent? Because I mean, personally, I felt this at times, especially when I'm in, if we just call them kind of white spaces or non-Muslim spaces, where I'm the only kind of visibly Muslim person in the team. I guess now beards are more trendy, so I might not be Muslim or whatever, but generally speaking, it's quite obvious that I'm Muslim, I think, anyway. And I think I have personally felt that kind of duty to represent the faith and be good, so that people don't think bad of Muslims. Do you feel that when it comes to niqab? Because even when it, like, looking within the Muslim community, maybe I'm not plugged into the right circles, but I see very few niqab wearing sisters who are actively involved in things like politics and organizing events and whatever else, like yourself. You're one of very few that I even before having met you, I knew of you.
Yeah. I mean, the burden of responsibility for me is towards God, most and foremost, to be honest. I don't want to claim that I represent all Muslims, and certainly I don't want to represent all Muslims. I want to represent the needs and the concerns of Muslims. And I feel that if I'm in this white-dominated space, it might be really difficult to actually express an opposing views or something that they're not used to. But I feel it's our responsibility towards God, not people, is actually to express these concerns and be vocal. And Salim, one of the most famous hadith, the saying of the Prophet Muhammad, when he was asked about what is the best of jihad, and jihad means struggle, he said, is the word of truth in the front of a tyrant. So this is my jihad, and this is how I see it. That if God gave me the power, whether at a community level or at a political level, God will ask me of how did I utilize that to help the communities and represent their concerns and needs rather than representing people, because is difficult. There's no way you can represent everyone in anyone, but you can definitely represent common needs or common concerns that can affect most people.
That's interesting. And I think finally, looking at politics in general, the kind of areas that are of interest to you through your activism work, like we mentioned earlier, I think issues around Islamophobia, women's empowerment, anti-racism, I think refugees as well was on there as a welcoming refugees. How do you feel about the current landscape of, I guess, Muslims, but also female Muslims in politics? And do you think, because you've mentioned that there's a need for more participation broadly, but I guess, yeah, how do you feel about how things are currently in terms of the status quo, and also what the future holds for politics and engagement within the Muslim community? Like, I mean, it would be nice to get an assessment from your side of where things are today, and where we can and should go in the future.
Okay. I mean, it's interesting time for British Muslims and for Welsh Muslims, specifically because, the early generation of the Muslim community, the generation that came during the 60s and the 70s, their top priorities were the basic necessities. So building mosques, having halal meats, just finding any job, taxi drivers, things like that, any job that could actually just support them financially. But the second, the third generation, your generation, my generation, though I came to Britain as a refugee. I wasn't born or bred in this country. I came as a refugee, but our priorities for this generation is equal citizenship now, that we have our mosques, we have the halal meat, but we are equal citizens. And what does that mean? That we really should have equal access to all areas of life in Britain. And that includes politics, sport, music, all aspects of life, that you must not see us as the others anymore. We should not be at the fringe of society, but we should be at the heart of society. But when it comes to women specifically, women in politics is very tough, generally speaking. Even if you're a white woman, you're subject to misogyny and sexism. It's unbelievable, yeah? But imagine women of color, what kind of things she could face, triple discrimination against your faith, your gender, your color is constant. But at the same time is what really helped is actually a lot of people who might not even share my faith, definitely Muslims do, but those people who don't share my faith know about the struggle, and especially with the rise of Black Lives Matters movement across the globe, there's a lot of talks about representation, a lot of talks about diversity, and I think now the risk is not to fall into the trap of neoliberalism and that representation only needed when it benefits the status quo, and if not, then we should exclude them, and things like that. But I think now, especially the younger generation, they're more open. Not because they're also young, it's also because of the social media that played a big role in widening the horizon and also connecting people across the globe. And this is how Black Lives Matters movement grew. Everyone now knows who George Floyd is. We've seen his painting at the heart of Damascus in Syria. People who are actually subject to war are actually connecting with the struggle of African Americans in America, which for me is beautiful to see.
And the final thing I wanted to actually ask was that if inshallah you have a successful career in politics, and one day you find yourself at the House of Parliament, walking in those quite beautiful corridors, if I'm honest. Yeah, go on. Sorry?
The Senate is the Senate. The
No,
Welsh
no, but in my imagination, you're coming down to our lowly Westminster setup at some point. No, but for the hypothetical, let's go with it. So you're
Got
walking
you.
down and you cross paths with Boris Johnson. What would you say to him?
What would I say to Boris Johnson if I get elected?
If you bumped into him at some point.
This moment comes, yeah, and I will say one thing. I am not a letterbox. I am a member of the Senate, Mr. Boris Johnson.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for your time and for sharing your experiences. And I've learned, as I said, a little bit more about the Welsh political system. If ever I come across an incident where I need to know more about the Senate, Senate or Seneth?
Senate. Yeah, it's like that. Senate.
Seneth. Interesting. Yeah. Well, I can pronounce Plaid Cymru apparently, so I'll take that as a win from today. Yeah. But no, thank you again. Is there anything else you wanted to add or mention or say before we wrap up?
No, thank you so much. I need everyone to pray for me. That is, if it's best for me, that God makes it happen. That's all. Thank you.
Inshallah. Thank you very much.